As soon as I got into weed, I basically was open to doing any drug. Once in a while, I would inject cocaine and I would feel crazy. I totally destroyed my life with heroin addiction. Does it freak you out?
What initially led you down this path?
I went to college. I felt alone and scared and lonely. I desperately wanted to not care about stuff. And I think that's where my really hardcore, dangerous addiction kicked in. And then I got into television work, music and rock and roll, and everybody that was in it, they didn't think it was uncool to be stoned.
You're making 90, 100K working in television, and you're blowing all that money on drugs?
All of it. I was the kind of person that I got high as soon as I woke up. I mean, I smoked weed probably from age 18 to age 41 on a daily basis, unless I was in jail or in a medical facility or something. At the first treatment I went to, they were like, you're going to be fine. I left there and I had drugs at home and I did them as soon as I got home. The last treatment I went to, they were like, you're going to die. I had a kid. Did I stump you? I stumped you. Are you like, this guy's fucked up?
How many times did you go to rehab through all these years?
I went to 4 rehabs and probably 20 detoxes.
You can't help anybody who does not want to change.
No one can do anything for you with recovery. You're the only person that can do it.
From there till now, did you ever imagine that life had this in store for you too? I have a very interesting story for you. So I'm watching this podcast with Rich Roll last month. I'm binging on it. And I come across David Manheim. He is talking about his struggle with heroin and weed addiction for over 20 years and how he was able to turn his life around at 41. He's 8 years sober now and has a super successful podcast called Dopey, which has gone on to help thousands of people who are struggling with substance abuse themselves, and has over 17 million downloads. I just knew that I had to get David on this podcast. I reached out to him very graciously. He agreed to have a conversation with me where we talk about his extraordinary journey from addiction to recovery. Probably one of the most intense conversations I've ever had, where we dive deep into what initially draws people to drugs, how addiction impacts them, and the tumultuous path to recovery, which is most of the times not a straight line. The one takeaway that I have from this chat and this conversation is the quote that he shared with me, which goes something like this, that don't stop until the miracle happens. I'll say that again. Don't stop until the miracle happens. We can pretty much apply this to everything that we do and everything in our lives. Whether you're doing something, whether you're struggling with something, if we don't stop, if we don't give up, if we keep pushing ourselves, and if we keep showing up, eventually the miracle will happen. Eventually we will win. That's the podcast. Enjoy. Before I let you go, today's episode is brought to you by Kent Water Purification Systems. They are the pioneers in providing you with tasty, healthy, and chemical-free water. Not only are their water softeners great to reduce hair fall, but they have some amazing benefits towards your laundry and dishes. This is their offer for the current month. I recommend that you visit kentwater.ca and schedule a free water test to learn and understand more about the benefits of installing a water purification system. Thanks and enjoy the chat. You've been very open and candid about sharing your struggles with addiction, and I want to dive right deep into it. What initially led you down this path, and what were some of the pivotal moments that you realized along in your journey that this has to change as well?
The path to recovery or the path to addiction?
Firstly, the path to addiction.
I think I was just a fearful person. I grew up in New York City, and like you said, my parents were both teachers, and I went to this very, very special school. And, you know, people talk about the disease of alcoholism or the disease of addiction, and I'm not 100% sure. I don't have that confidence that alcoholism or addiction is a disease, but I'm not a doctor, so that's kind of why I'm wary of giving it that kind of name, but the American Medical Association has decided it's an illness. So maybe I'll go along with that for the sake of this conversation. I think that when I started using drugs, it was because I was very nervous. I was very nervous about who I was and what I was doing. And I didn't really drink or do drugs until I went to college. I had messed with it a little bit, but when I went to college, one of the hallmark telltale signs that alcoholics talk about is feeling uncomfortable in their skin. And I went to the same school from nursery school till senior year of high school. And I was very comfortable, even though I didn't perform necessarily well and I didn't handle every situation as well as I would have liked. And I didn't get great grades or anything. I had a comfortable existence. And when I went to college, I felt alone and scared and lonely. And that's kind of where classic alcoholism kind of presented itself. And for me, alcohol was never something that I could do because I think I had actually another thing that alcoholics say is they are allergic to alcohol. And when they drink, they break out in handcuffs. That's like the joke in AA. When I drank, I would get sick. I would throw up. I would turn red. I would fall asleep. It was not a substance that agreed with my physiology. And I found that marijuana really was a substance that agreed with my physiology, and it made me feel the way I wanted to feel. It treated my anxiety. It treated my fearfulness. It made it so I didn't have to be so neurotic and overwhelmingly caring so much. I desperately wanted to not care about stuff because the caring to me seemed uncool and also it seemed unmanageable. So that's where my addiction started. And as soon as I got into weed, I basically was open to doing any drug. And I didn't really have a problem. I mean, I smoked weed probably from age 18 to age 41 on a daily basis, unless I was in jail or in a medical facility or something. But then as I did weed, I would do psychedelics and I tried cocaine, and cocaine didn't really agree with me, but opiates really did. And I liked psychedelics, but I couldn't see taking them too often because it was so stressful. Ecstasy, the next day you felt shitty. With benzodiazepines, which are an anti-anxiety medication, I felt so comfortable. And with opiates, I felt like these are the feelings that I really want. And I think that's where my really hardcore, dangerous addiction kicked in. Like, I don't think my weed addiction was going to be particularly dangerous.
You said that you smoked weed throughout. That remained one constant through the 15 years, 16 years that you were using substances. So, I mean, now what was weed doing for you or to you that it was difficult to give up?
It made me feel good. It made me feel the way I wanted to feel. I was a big music fan and a big art fan and a musician. Like, not a great musician, but I was a musician, and I loved how music felt when I smoked weed or did a lot of different drugs, and I loved playing music when I was on these substances. I loved the feeling, and I really liked having a feeling that nothing was that important, unless I liked it. Like, for some reason, when I smoked weed, things that I liked became very important, and things that I didn't like, I kind of forgot about. And I liked that response to it. I liked the messy, blended reality that weed and some psychedelics and those other substances provided me. It made me feel exactly, I mean, not because weed doesn't make everybody feel relaxed. I know so many people that smoke weed and they get anxious and they get paranoid and they can't handle it. My physiology was perfect for weed. I know so many people who loved alcohol and who loved cocaine, and my physiology wasn't good for alcohol and cocaine. It was great for THC, opiates, and benzos. I think it's all brain chemistry and physiology.
But at any given point in time, uh, did you start having like bad trips with these? Because eventually, what happens is if you're doing any sort of substances, and like you mentioned, that you're only focusing on things that you like and things that are difficult, hard, or the things that we don't enjoy, we bury that aside or we put that aside. So the next day when you wake up, and then there is something in the subconscious that's still there, right? That because it's not totally gone away, it's just gone away for that small little period of time. Would that not come back and haunt you and trouble you and make you anxious? Or then the way to deal with that was again using more substance?
I was the kind of person that I got high as soon as I woke up. I was not a
Uh,
person that would wait. I was like in suspended adolescence. I was a child until I got sober, really. You know, the consequences changed. They got worse, they got better, but I never learned from anything and I stayed high. You know what I mean? I stayed as high as I could and once I started doing like with psychedelics and it wasn't all like it was like with weed, like if I was in college, the consequences were not very serious. I got arrested a couple times with weed. That was bad. I didn't like that. I got kicked out of school, but I managed to transfer colleges when I got kicked out. So I never got caught. Um, and I got away with a lot of stuff. Like I grew up like a very manipulative person, the one thing I've always been good at is talking and relating to people. So I've always been very good at manipulating situations and weed was just like another opportunity to pull off like scams and I liked that, you know, because I was this child, this suspended adolescent and and then I got into television work and weed was also good for that because it was like the TV work that I got into was all around music and rock and roll and everybody that was in it they weren't drug addicts, but they didn't think it was uncool to be stoned. They thought I could handle it. And I
mhm.
think I thought I could handle it, but in reality I wasn't handling it.
Like you said, if you were able to manage, manipulate, and still come out on the other side, that definitely there is a lot of high functionality of the brain happening there, because you have to come up with different solutions, be creative, make sure that most of the times you either have a really good excuse if something hasn't happened, but also at the same time making sure that the job is getting done. A lot of high functioning ability was already there. And I think what you're doing right now is something that you were born to do. And I saw a couple of your podcasts where you also mentioned, because your mom used to watch this show, a talk show, which you used to listen to as well. And you were like, this is something which is like living a dream. I'm forgetting the name, sorry. But you wanted to have a show of your own, and Dopey is that show for you.
100%. I mean, my mom would listen to old radio shows when I was a kid in the morning. And I remember just hearing the show and thinking that seems like a really relaxing thing to do. Like the host of the show, like talking to people and just kind of like hanging out. And I felt comforted by the guy. It was an old New York City radio guy named John Gambling, and it was on a radio
John
station in
Gambling.
New York called 1010 Wins, which is a very famous old New York City AM radio station where they're like it's like the classic line is you give us 22 minutes, we give you the world. And it's just like all day news. And then in the morning they had this talk show. And then I got into other talk shows and, you know, I never thought that I could actually do one. You know what I mean? Like I knew that I wanted to do one. But I did wind up on TV young. I wound up on MTV when I was in high school, doing some little things. And then I wound up as soon as I could be in the workforce, I found my way to TV. But I didn't in my years in between, like when I had a band in college or was fucking around in college, I could have easily tried to make a talk show then, but it didn't occur to me. Do you know what I mean? It's funny when I think about it because there was a kid in our high school. His name he was a successful sports broadcaster. His name was Max Kellerman. And when he
Mhm.
was 13, he had a public access show in New York City. And if you don't know what public access is, it's like
No,
cable
I don't.
systems. Okay, back in the day, pre-internet, cable systems would set aside X amount of channels to community people who wanted to have a show. and you could show up and the quality was low and the sets were not particularly professional, but you could go there and pitch an idea and have a kind of community-based show. And there would be like political shows and religious shows. And this kid in my high school created a show called Max on Boxing. And he would just sit there at this desk and talk about boxing. And he wound up becoming like a huge boxing expert. He's in the Rocky movies and he's on ESPN and he knew exactly what he wanted to do really young and pursued it. And I always thought about him, but I was way busy doing drugs. He wasn't a drug addict and I was a drug addict, and it didn't come first. What came first was me feeling comfortable. Like, so when I needed to work, you know, when I was in college, I sold drugs, not that many. My parents totally took care of me. I did not have to work very much at all. And when I got out of college, when I needed to work, I was like, how do I try working in this field? And I wound up getting involved in television production. So, I mean, and fast forward to now, I totally destroyed my life with heroin addiction. And when I kind of stopped doing so much heroin, I wanted to try making creative attempts at television or video, because YouTube kind of circumvents television. You don't need to try to be on a TV station if you can make a great YouTube video. So I started making YouTube videos in the deli that I work, and I made a little series there called The Last Jewish Waiter, about a waiter who hates waiting tables and he wants to have a talk show. So he makes a talk show while he waits tables. And it didn't do very well. It did a little bit well. My friend Chris saw that and he was like, why don't we try something? And then we started doing Dopey, and that's when it kind of crystallized for me that I could do exactly whatever I wanted. And it was great.
That's such a fascinating story
Journey.
there as well.
Journey.
And I'm gonna it's absolutely it's really fascinating, your journey. But I'm gonna go back and stay there, because I know
Please.
when you talk about television as well, there was a time in the 90s where you're making about 80, 90, 100K working in television. That's a shitload of money for
Especially
the time.
then, and I was like 23,
Exactly.
22. Yeah, it was good.
And you're blowing all that money on drugs?
All of it. And I also lived in really, really cheap housing. Like
Yes.
I grew up in really cheap housing, and I got a cheap apartment when I was my mother signed me up to get a cheap apartment when I was 11, and I got it when I was 22, and I think I paid $300 a month, and I was making 85 grand a year, or something like that. And I was broke because I spent all the money on heroin. It was bad. It's bad. I'm not trying to brag. It was pathetic, And I didn't realize what was to come. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was still a kid. I didn't realize that I had another, many, 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 many years of using in front of me and misery.
I want to ask you something. What sort of a high does one get with heroin?
It's been described so many ways. The way I'll describe it is you kind of get this rush of a really, really good feeling coupled with this kind of deep mutedness. So like you feel it's like very comforting. It's people talk about it as if you weren't comforted enough as a baby, you're very prone to having a heroin addiction. It makes you feel well taken care of, protected, and super spacey, like waves of euphoria and warmth. Like, I think that's the best way to describe it. You feel better. And in the beginning, you also kind of get, when I did it, I would get energy from it, and I would feel this powerful, euphoric feeling plus a calmness. And then there were also bad sides of it, which was nauseous. You'd feel nauseous. You'd get constipated, but you would feel really euphoric, and you really wouldn't care about anything, which I loved. Both of those things.
And you said you tried coke as well, and that what sort of a high does cocaine give you?
Cocaine never even really got me high. It barely touched me. It made me feel anxious whenever I did it, and all cocaine really did for me was make me crave heroin or anti-anxiety medication. And I mean, like, once in a while I would inject cocaine and I would feel crazy, just crazy. And I would, and my head would be ringing and I would feel this intense energy, but I didn't know how to live with it. Like, my brain could live with opiates and benzos and weed, but the feeling of stimulants in my head. And I also did a bunch of methamphetamine, crystal meth, and it didn't work with my brain chemistry. It made me feel very uncomfortable and overstimulated, but also just unpleasant. It was not a
Hmm.
feeling that I liked.
So initially, all this started with you trying to overcome a little bit of fear or vulnerability that you had when you were growing up, and you started this as a student. And then I know, because I've seen a couple of your podcasts, you outrightly say, and I love the fact that there are no you're not beating around the bush. You said you absolutely loved doing it. The question here is that eventually you would have had a lot of time now during recoveries and stuff to figure out that what really was happening. Where did the addiction start? What was it that, is there any unresolved issue, trauma, or something that you were trying to get over through this, or it was just something that eventually the feeling was so good that you didn't want to let go of it?
I think it's both. I think the beginning was kind of like the general feeling that teenagers have, which is they feel out of place, they feel fearful, they feel uncomfortable, they feel like they don't fit in. So, and again, when I was in high school, I didn't really have that feeling because, I mean, I had that feeling, but it wasn't overwhelming because I had a group of friends that I had been very close with since I was very young. Um, in college, I felt very much on the outside of social groups. And I found that when I smoked weed, I didn't feel on the outside of social groups. I didn't feel on the outside of the world. And if I did, I found I didn't care, which was really the greatest outcome of all drug use for me, because I
Not
care
caring.
very deeply about shit that is not necessarily helpful for me to care deeply about often. At this point, at 50, with 9 years sober, I've learned to deal with this kind of stuff. But in my, between when I started using and until I stopped using, I really did not know how to deal with people or life or circumstances.
That's interesting what you bring up, Dave, because can I say, when you said that you were thinking deeply, it's also paraphrase that to overthinking.
Sure.
And when I talk about addiction, uh, confession, I probably don't know half meaning of half of the drugs that you've mentioned, which I will be Googling and stuff, because my exposure has been to the shows that we've been seeing growing up, the
Right.
American shows. So there's few that I know of, and then of course the others I
What
will
are the
figure out.
American drug shows that you
I
watch?
mean, from what Breaking Bad, I understood what meth is after seeing that.
Right.
Weed, pretty much everybody knows about coke. That's why these are the, and heroin. Other than that, benzos and all the other things that you've spoken, I'm going to do a research, and while the podcast is going to happen, just a description of what this is. I don't, if that
Benzos
helps
is
anything.
like, it's like Valium. It's like what they give people who are very anxious. They if
Right.
you have anxiety, and anti-anxiety medications are usually benzodiazepines, and they're Valium, Klonopin, Xanax, Ativan. Sure, there's others, but those are the big ones.
Hmm.
And they make you feel not nervous. They take away your anxiety. They take away your worries, and they often make you sleepy.
What's your relationship at this, during all this, when you're in the thick and thin of things where you are using all these drugs? What's your relationship with your parents?
It's pretty estranged. Like, I as soon as I started smoking weed
How soon
regularly,
did they find out? Sorry, how soon did they find out that this was happening? Is was a regular affair?
they didn't find out until my heroin addiction was so bad that I had to check into a hospital in New York. And it was kind of,
Oh.
I had probably been smoking weed every day for, I don't know, 7 years or 6 years. And they knew that I messed with weed, but they didn't know how much. Like they didn't know that I couldn't go anywhere unless I had weed. They didn't know that I couldn't do anything unless I had weed. Like I never didn't have weed. And if I didn't have weed, I would like scrape resin. You know, when you smoke weed, resin forms on whatever you smoke. I would scrape resin. I would find somebody that had weed. Like I was, if you could be addicted to weed, I was completely addicted to weed. And they didn't know about it. And they certainly didn't know that I had done anything else. They found out because like I was pretty secretive and I lived a completely separate life from my parents. Like after I graduated high school, I never lived with them again. They
Mhm.
didn't see how I lived. They didn't really want they didn't really want to know. And but it was one of those, it was a very pivotal moment in my life, really. I was working for that TV company and I had worked there for, I want to say, 2 years, and I was making more money than either of them. They were both teachers, and they were impressed, but they also could tell I was fucked up. You know what I mean? But they didn't know why. They couldn't really see what was wrong. And like we talked about, I ran out of money, and I just the equate. You know, a drug addict is always doing this equation in their head: how long can I go? Do how long? How much money do I have to keep this going? How do I get through this period? Whatever. And drug, and I stole, and I borrowed, and I didn't pay back, and I did whatever I could think of to keep it going. But eventually, I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I need to go. I need to get some help. You know, and I didn't know what that looked like. And there was a free detox at a hospital in Manhattan, and I had this moment, this big crossroads. I think about it all the time, where I could have told my job or I could have told my parents. And I decided to tell my parents, and I called out of the job sick, and my parents went down to this hospital where I was like in a, you know, in the hospital clothes, and they came in looking all good, and they couldn't believe that their son was addicted to heroin. And then when the job found out, they fired me because I was in breach of contract. Whereas if
Right.
I had gone to the job, they would have been legally responsible to send me to a nice facility. And I always think like, what would my life be like now if I had made that decision? But my life is very good now, so I kind of don't regret it. But I used
Yeah,
to regret it.
definitely. And I think you have to go through your journey to eventually get to where you are in terms of clarity and in terms of what's happening. So it's never easy to connect the dots looking forward, but always easier to connect them looking back. But you gotta, I don't know if this is making peace with it. Eventually, the idea is that yes, everything has happened, or whatever has happened for a reason. And we get mature, we learn a few lessons. Definitely, we get knocked down quite a lot. And talking about getting knocked down, how many times did you go to rehab through all these years, and how many times did it not work out for you?
Well, there's two different things. There's detox, which is like a
Hmm.
5 day thing where you check
Okay.
in someplace and you stay there for 5 days. And I went to every free detox in New York, a few of them twice. And I went to every free detox in Los Angeles, a few of them 3 times. I would say I went to detox maybe 20 times. And I went to rehab, which is longer term, usually
Yep.
28 days. I went to rehab. I mean, I went to one rehab that lasted like 6 months in Florida. I went to a rehab in Connecticut called Mountainside, where I met Chris, who I started Dopey with, for 28 days. So that's two. I went to this place upstate, but I left there after 14 days, but that's three. I went to 4 rehabs and probably 20 detoxes.
What happens in a rehab?
Lots of stuff. Lots of stuff happens in rehab. It depends who you are. What happened to me mostly in rehab is I would get there. I would try to find some people to glom onto so I didn't feel so alone. And I mean, in detox, what you do is you kick the substance. Like you go through withdrawal, and they try to medicate your withdrawal, because when you stop doing heroin, it's very painful and unpleasant. And you get a sickness. So I went to so many detoxes because I was totally physically addicted to heroin, and I knew kicking at home was too uncomfortable. So I would, and basically a detox is they medicate you. They give you methadone, or they give you Librium, or they give you Suboxone, or they give you whatever. They give you something, buprenorphine, and sometimes they'll give you Valium, and sometimes they'll give, whatever they give you, you go there so that the detox is not so bad. Rehab is usually you learn some skills, you go to some 12-step meetings, you have a counselor, you make a plan for what you're going to do when you leave. You watch a lot of movies, maybe you smoke cigarettes, you play games. Like I was always the sucker that brought his guitar to rehab because in my mind, I was like, I'm going to go to rehab and write an album and write a book and get in shape. Like I had these ideas that were totally fantasy. And that's probably also why they always failed me, because I was never ready. Nothing works for anybody until they're ready to change. And you don't know when that inspiration is going to come to you.
There is no timeline.
I don't think so. I mean, not in my experience, and not in the experience. I've talked to so many people at this point. Some people get sober the first time they realize they have a problem, and they're like, I'm good. And they do what's necessary to have a nice life. And they've learned something inside of them said, I don't want to do that again. And some people get it when they're 14 years old. And some people get it when they're 74 years old. And if there was a way to hand it to somebody and say, here it is, I think somebody would have done that. They would have gotten very wealthy and helped a lot of people, but it doesn't work like that.
How hard is the process when you're in rehab? Because from what you just told me, and this is my understanding, detox, there is always a replacement available, right? You said like if there is Valium to reduce your anxiety, etc. But rehab, there doesn't seem to be anything. Maximum that you can do is smoke a cigarette, and it's about just. But the body is craving that drug. The mind is playing tricks on you, and actually, as well, if somebody was using drugs as frequently as strongly as you were, I'm sure that they were physically you were craving it more than anything else as well, right? So probably it would have been more difficult for you to overcome. So what's the struggle? What is it like there?
For me, I always, I don't think, I mean, I never went to a rehab and really wanted to get sober. I went to rehabs, and what I always wanted to figure out was, how do I get out of this place and just smoke weed and not do heroin? Like that's really, or not take pills. Like, how do I get through this, get out of here and just smoke weed? And I never figured it out. Like in all those places and all those treatments, I never figured that out. And that was my aim. My aim was never recovery or sobriety or abstinence. It was, how do I get out of here and not wind up back here again, but do exactly what I want? Because I didn't know what was good for me, and I didn't know that I could enjoy a life that wasn't full of substances.
So at some point in time, one fear got replaced by another. Initially it was the fear of fitting in and not looking at things that weren't perfect or good, and now it is about how would life be without this one substance.
I got sober in 12-step recovery, and fear is a huge topic. And there are
Right.
all these great acronyms for fear, which is fuck everything and run, or face everything and recover. Or a really good one is false expectations appearing real. And I think when you're talking about how do you live without these substances, how do you live without intoxication, how do you live without getting high, the idea is that that life can't be good. So those are false expectations appearing real. Like I could never be happy if I'm not X, Y, and Z, as opposed to what if I try X, Y, and Z? What kind of joy and hope could that give me? And I didn't get there. I think the last time I went to treatment, somebody told me at the first treatment I went to, they were like, you're going to be fine. I was like 22. They were like, you're going to be okay, blah, blah, blah. And then I left there and I had drugs at home and I did them as soon as I got home. The last treatment I went to, they were like, you're going to die. This thing is going to kill you. And I was 40, I was 30, I think I was 36 or 37. I had turned 37 the day I left that treatment. And they said I was going to die. And I had a kid. I had a kid who was, she was, I don't know, like 13 months old or something, maybe 15, 16 months old when I went to treatment that last time. And I really didn't want to be this way anymore. Like, I really didn't want to be that person. And the truth is, after 2011, I didn't succumb to the depths of depravity that I had before that. I did smoke weed a lot. I did do pills here and there. After 2011, I was not a crazy heroin addict, pill addict. I was more of a functioning uh, stoner and occasional pill taker. But still, it wasn't recovery. But that last time, it was like the consequences of not being able to be present in my baby daughter's life were real enough for me to really make a shift. It wasn't the ultimate shift, but it was a huge shift. Did I stump
And
you? I stumped
no,
you.
I'm just absorbing this. Like I said, the beauty of what I'm doing over here is to be able to have this conversation. I've never had this conversation in my life. I'm just trying
Does it
to
freak
absorb
you out?
everything.
Like, are you like, this guy's fucked
No,
up? I can't believe he
no,
did this.
no, it doesn't, because, like I said, I've been sick the last 4 years
What are
in
you sick with?
Canada. Ah, just me being inside my head for so
Mm,
long. Overthinking, self-deprecation, negative
right.
self-talk. Um, like I said, I reached a point where I was not happy with my life, with what I was doing. And if they say that you do the deathbed test, right? So if I was to
I never
conk
heard that.
off
What is, wait,
today,
what, wait, hold up. What is the deathbed test?
basically, if you were to die today, are you going to die happy? Have you lived up to your true potential? Have you done everything that you wanted to do? Is this the life that you wanted to have?
I never heard of that. I like that.
So I did that, and actually, in all fairness, podcasts have sort of been the savior, because I started listening to a lot of podcasts, whether it was self help, whether it was Rich Roll turning his life around at 41, showing me and a lot of other people that there is hope. You can always be who you want to be, because today is the youngest we'll ever be. It is
Yeah, that's a
not that
is
late.
that a rich rollism? Today is the youngest we'll ever be.
No, that's something that I've heard from Chris Williamson. But Rich gave me that inspiration that, if and this is something which is Rich rollism, that if life is crumbling and it's pulling you apart and everything is dismantling, fuck, what an opportunity! Because
Right.
this time around, when you start to rebuild yourself, you can leave the parts that you didn't like. And that gave me hope. And for me, it was, like I said, addiction. I'm just trying to draw a parallel. It's not as if I need to be on any sort of a drug. Just being in that negative mindset, and depression hitting you so hard that you just freeze. And then there will be a day where you will be motivated and say, fuck, I'm going to turn my life around. And then there is also this external pressure of how a perfect life should be, which now social media tells us, which then your circle comes and tells you that this is how you're supposed to lead your life. And like I said, my job that I was stuck with was paying my bills. I couldn't leave it. So that made me sick. And then the entire thought of not being able to quit because of that was something that made me even more sick. So that is addiction as well.
Yeah.
Being having those relapses, going back, and just after those spouts of motivation, not having the discipline to follow through. So for me, relapse is that taking 10 steps back after having made that one step forward. How, how did you overcome that? Because eventually, when you decided, I've lived half my life, sort of that was the deathbed test, that now I have half of it remaining. I
Hopefully.
don't want the next half to be the same.
Yes. Yeah. No, that was totally my experience. And I mean, and I was about to say this to you. It's like I got well through 12 steps. I got well through 12-step recovery. It absolutely saved my life 100%. And I practice it. Like, I was at a meeting this morning. I'm going to work with a guy this afternoon to help him through his fifth step. Like, I'm in it. Like, and Rich does it too. It's what he did as well. And I needed something. I needed structure, and I needed community, and I needed literature, and I needed a real plan. And it provided me that. And I'll just speak frankly, I was
Hmm.
not a drinker, and I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wasn't really an alcoholic in that I didn't drink. Um, but I needed everything it had to teach me, and I needed the spirituality of their solution. Like, I needed that more than anything, and really their solution in 12-step recovery. Basically, there's 12 steps. The first three steps are considered or the first yeah, three steps are considered trusting God, right? Uh, which is trusting the universe, having some sense of spirituality. The second, or the first four steps are that trusting God. The next four steps are cleaning house, meaning what inside me is not where it should be. What about me do I need to examine and change? And then what harms have I done to other people that I can try to make peace with now? And that's the second four steps. So the first four is trust God. The second four is clean house. And the last four is to help others. So, like, in your last four steps, you're trying to carry the message, you're trying to be of service as best you can, you're making amends, and you're being of service, and you're when you fuck up, you're trying to make a correction that day. So you're trusting God, you're cleaning house, and you're helping others. And if I participate in that on a daily basis, I find that I have the reprieve from my own insanity. It's like what Rich Roll said. Like every bad deal is an opportunity to have a better one. So, like, I personally got better through 12 steps. One of my best friends called me yesterday, and he's my age, and we were strung out on heroin when we were young, and he kind of gave up all the drugs and started a life and had three kids in the Midwest and created this big painting company. And but he drank, and through the years he's had horrible runs with alcoholism, and he does not want to participate in a 12-step program. He is too stubborn. And I don't think it needs to be a 12-step program like for you or for him. It just needs to be something, and it needs to be a practice. It needs to be a daily practice. It needs to be something you do a lot during the day, and that keeps you from fear, from depression, from illness, from all those things.
Thank you for sharing that. And I was looking at the 12 step recovery process as well when I was prepping for our chat today. I realized that, the initial first four steps, like you said, is about surrendering to God and thinking that, knowing that there is a bigger power there, whether it is God or spirituality, however you take it. And that's really important because that's where you drive hope from. And you probably can disconnect with what's happened in the past, because the real reason why we are anxious is either we are stuck in the past and at the same time very scared about the future, so we are fucking up our present because that's something that we are spending so much time in thinking about the past and the future. We don't
Well,
know what's happening in the present.
there's a great quote from a very spiritual film called Kung Fu Panda, where he
Yes, I know.
says the past is history, the future is a mystery, which is why we call today the present because it's a gift.
It's a gift.
And it's like it's not easy though, and nothing is easy, but great love and I mean, spirituality is very scary to people who don't have God. I didn't really have God when I got sober, but I was desperate, and an old guy in my meeting said, "Well, do you have a gift of desperation?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "Well, use that as your God. Use group of drunks, use group of drug addicts, use great outdoors. Use whatever works for you." I mean, I think Star Wars has created this great potential spirituality, like that there's this great binding force in the universe, which is, obviously appears in other religions, like that there is this great force that binds everything in reality. And it's a very beautiful concept. And it's I mean, there's so many beautiful similar concepts in Buddhism and Hinduism around this universal binding force that keeps us all together. And it's like when you can get into that mind, the potential for it's like really it's all about getting out of this mind and not being
Absolutely.
so caught up in ourselves.
Absolutely. And, there is so much of content that you see, and a lot of times it's motivational as well, where people want to really pep you up, and it's about show the world, show them this, beat them at this. The biggest fight that you're fighting is with this, not with anybody else. Beat yourself every day with whatever you feel is the negatives that are coming, and not succumbing to that and the tricks that the mind is playing. That's the biggest victory that you can have towards growth, towards gratitude, towards living a more fulfilled life.
Well, how can you love yourself? How can you love other people? How can you love yourself? How can you spread love the best you can? And when that is the highest, aspiration, it's very hard to do wrong if you're spreading love and kindness and being of service to your fellow man or woman or the universe, whatever.
Helping others. And I know that this is the platform that where Dopey comes into the picture as well, because you have a thriving community where you're able to help so many people. But before I get into that, I want to understand that from your experience, that so many things, how people will react. You probably know when you're having a conversation with someone, if that person is going to receive your feedback or not, and what they're going to exactly do after the conversation. I've also read that you've lost a lot of close
Yeah.
friends, Chris,
My
and a
friend
lot of other
Todd.
people,
Yeah.
your friend Todd as well, people who've helped you with the podcast as well. I remember Ryan as well, right? So a lot of close people that have lost their lives. How are you dealing with this? How do you manage to not for it to not wear you down?
It does wear me down. It's when I was using, I didn't have any friends that died.
Yeah.
And now in my recovery, I've had a lot of friends that have died. But also, it's like if you make a podcast that's primarily around heroin addiction, that's not necessarily focused on the solution, you're basically saying I'm creating a nexus of misery, debauchery, and ultimately death. The fact was that Chris and I hadn't considered that because we had been living with drug addiction for so long that it wasn't like obvious. It would be obvious to anybody else besides us that death would be such a prominent feature of the community. And people started dying shortly after we started making the show. And so many people have died during the summer. My friend Todd, who I went to college with, he died
Yeah.
in June of 2018. Chris died in July of 2018, July 24th.
2 weeks
I
between
think more
these
like
two.
6, like whatever, about a month, a little more than a month. They died, And it was crazy. It was also the same year that we had our second child, and we had bought a house, and like my daughter Susan was born on May 15th, 2018. We moved into the house maybe May 17th, and Todd was dead within that month, and Chris was basically dead within the next. And it was a very, very crazy, difficult time. And since then, we've lost a ton of people, and we just lost this woman in our community named Annie, and it's just been one after the other, and it's not easy to deal with. But I also know inherently that, I mean, people who are heroin addicts, there's a ton of people that are heroin addicts that get clean and have nice lives and never do heroin again. And death is not on the table for us. But a lot of people who've never done heroin just assume that all heroin addicts die. It's like, I think doing the show, and I think living soberly is a very, very great force for solidarity with people out there that are trying to get their shit together. And it's also it's evidence to those who aren't drug addicts that drug addicts don't have to die from drugs. So like it rattles me every summer. And this summer was one of the worst because of this woman that just died. But it also, I have a lot of hope because my life is really, really great and it's free. Like I'm totally free at this point, but the deaths hurt me. But it also comes down to the person who dies they can't break free of their addiction. It's like what we talked about. It's not necessarily, there's no way to quantify how anybody gets sober. And I couldn't force this woman who just died to stop using. It was on her. You know what I mean?
Totally. Because at some point in time, you have to disconnect from this as well. Now you're serving and you're helping them. Eventually, I remember from your chat with Rich as well, and even I think right now you mentioned this, that you can't help anybody who does not want to change.
You can't even help anybody that does. I mean, you can do whatever you do, but whatever their reality is, it's like I know you're from India, but in America in the 80s, there was a campaign. There were a lot of wildfires, right? And it was because people would go camping and not put out their cigarette or not put out their campfire, and all these wildfires started. So they created this cartoon bear they called Smokey the Bear. And Smokey the Bear had a shovel over his shoulder and a hat that said Smokey, and he would point at the camera and he would say, "Only you can prevent forest fires. Only you." And that's the deal. It's like no one can do anything for you with recovery. You're the only person that can do it. Everybody can help you. Anybody who's in recovery, we want to help anybody who's struggling, but it comes down to the person and what are you willing to do? What are they willing to do? What was I willing to do? I was willing to do whatever I was told to do it. Like I was willing to do it. There were very few. I mean, that's not really true. There were things I wasn't willing to do. And luckily those things didn't cost me my life or my recovery.
When was the first time you and Chris had a conversation about Dopey?
I don't even know. I would say it was probably, I mean, when I made The Last Jewish Waiter, I was still smoking weed. And Chris was dating this girl, and he brought her by the restaurant I worked at, and he was like, "Oh, we should do something." I remember pretty well. We were I had a balcony in my apartment, and we were sitting on the balcony, and I was probably smoking cigarettes, and he was like, "We should do something like that." And I was like, "What can we do?" And nothing ever happened again. And it wasn't until the summer of 2015 when I stopped using, when I got sober, and I talked to Chris every day because he was sober, and because he showed me proof that 12-step could work the way he did it, and he was a great inspiration to me. And I knew I needed something to do. I needed some kind of activity, some kind of like regular scheduled activity. And I was like, why don't we try making a podcast? And I didn't even know what a podcast was. I had another friend who was like, it would be a great podcast, a podcast about drug stories. And I basically just stole his idea. And when I started it with Chris, it wasn't really about a job or money. It was about something to do.
No pressure.
And yeah, no, I mean, we didn't even have gear. We didn't have a fucking thing.
I know.
You know,
uh,
so it was no
you
pressure.
guys prove that content rules, because I remember, and I remember listening this as well, that you said we are not buying anything fancy, no mics, nothing. We are just doing it with the MacBook speaker, because if we invest in it, there is every chance that we won't follow through. And you just started making content and banging that out.
Yeah, yeah. But it also saved my life to do it. Like, it gave me, like, I started doing Dopey with Chris when I had 4 months sober, and I could make fun of the program, and I could make fun of all the cliches I had heard. And it was a great tool in my early recovery, for sure. And Dopey's maintained to be a great tool for my recovery. As much as I've pretended it isn't, it's been a great tool in my recovery.
And talk about having every creator, and if you look at it, right, whether it's Gary Vee, Alex Hermosi, Ali Abdal, even for that matter, all these other content creators, they talk about having your niche defined, and that's how you should grow. That's the first step. In terms of having a niche, you guys knew exactly who you were going to reach out to. My question is, how soon or how quickly into the podcast did you start receiving feedback on the content? And how soon, more than that, how soon did you see people being able to relate to the content that you were putting out?
Pretty quickly, we started hearing from weird, random drug addicts. Chris had the bright idea of putting the names of all the drugs in the title of the show. Like, so it said Dopey, and we called it On the Dark Comedy of Drug Addiction. And then it said cocaine, heroin, LSD, marijuana, benzos. And that was the title for years, until iTunes decided that couldn't be the title. And they took us off iTunes with that title. And it took me like months to get back on iTunes, which was very scary. But I want to say within like 3 episodes, we got an email, or maybe 5 episodes, we had heard from somebody. Our numbers were terrible. Our numbers were terrible for a long time. But we developed a little weird community in the first few months.
And that was all the motivation that you and Chris needed to keep going?
I don't even think we needed it. Like, I think we were enjoying ourselves so much that, I mean, yeah, I think it was helpful to hear people getting a kick out of what we were doing. Definitely. Like, if we hadn't heard anything from anybody, I don't know if we would have kept continuing. So yes, I agree with that.
And I was reading an article the other day as well on Spin, and it says that not only does it capture the stories and all the debauchery that you guys were up to, but somebody who's followed the journey closely with Dopey, they've also seen your and Chris's friendship develop and camaraderie develop over the years on that.
Oh, definitely. Like, me and him, like, we met in 2011. We hung out, like, I don't know, like in the 28 days that we were in Mountainside in Canaan, Connecticut together, we probably spent 7 hours together, 8, something like that. And then in the next 5 years, maybe we spent 2 hours together. But then after we started doing the show, we communicated every day. From 2015 to 2018, every day we were in communication, and we recorded, between around 4 hours a month that we would do, and we would hang out for 7 hours every month. So we got to know each other, but mostly just building this thing and being obsessed with this thing and sharing this thing. And like, it was very beautiful. It was like a real relationship with this shared joy and process. And that's one of the reasons why I call it Dave and Chris, because it's like it'll never not be his show, even if he's not around. It was our show, and he put just as much work into it as I did in the beginning, and we were both very into it. We loved it, and I still love it, and he loved it until he died. But drugs also derailed his attention to detail once he was relapsing. But it was an amazing partnership.
Um, Relapse is common in the path of recovery.
Yeah. It's not required though, but it's very common.
What causes it though? Because if you've gone through, like when you said that when you guys started, Chris was 2 years
Sober, yeah.
clean as well, sober. And then, of course, through that, the podcast was going on and things were going well. Now everything is going well from the outside of it. What would cause a relapse in general?
That's a very important question. And the answer can be anything. Like with a drug addict or an alcoholic, anything can trigger a relapse. But I think in this story, the more important thing is, what are you doing to prevent relapse? Like that's what recovery is about in so many ways. What are you doing to prevent relapse? Which is why I still go to meetings, which is why I still work with other addicts and alcoholics, which is why I still talk to other addicts and alcoholics in recovery every day, which is why like I'm always engaged in step work, which is why I'm always praying and meditating, because I want to be guarded against the relapse. And I think when Chris relapsed, he wasn't doing those things. He was doing, and at that time in my recovery, I wasn't doing many of those things either. So I think relapse, I mean, people talk about like broken shoelaces. That's an old kind of cliche around 12 step. Like something little can affect you in a weird way, and then all of a sudden you're having a drink or you're taking a drug. But that's very unlikely if you're doing all of those things I just mentioned. You can have a bad day, but because you're engaged in all these tools of recovery, you call somebody, you go to a meeting, you read something that inspires you not to do the thing, so that you have some sort of prevention at your fingertips from succumbing to the relapse.
So you're not, or you're never completely out of the woods.
I don't think so.
You just need to make sure that you have
your gear, you're prepared.
You're prepared.
Yeah.
And that's why the role of community is essential, that you need to have people around you who can help you.
I think it's probably in some ways very similar to what you're dealing with, which is like where depression or anxiety can show up. It's like the way you avoid it taking you to a place you don't want to go is by maintaining your spiritual fitness. If you can maintain spiritual fitness, you can be prone to a moment of fear, sadness, whatever, but it doesn't take you.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely worked with me, because I've gone that spiritual route wherein I've been able to connect with myself at a deeper level. The first thing was for me the clarity. I knew that I didn't want to do that one particular job that I was in, but would a new job in a different company, different organization, surrounded with different people, have solved the problem? Only papering the cracks. It would have resurfaced 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line. Eventually, I had to go back and ask myself, what is it that you love doing, or what is it that you like doing? I think the first step out of the darkest room that you're in is just taking that one step, right? I didn't know what uh, step 5, 6, 7, 8 would look like. But I was like, okay, let me start with by doing a couple of things that I like. Podcast became a great platform because I was understanding that you can have these really interesting conversations with people. And for nothing else, for a very selfish reason, it was I will get to improve myself as a person, broaden my horizon, talk to people, get some different perspectives. And from there on, now it's become a platform where I'm like, okay, fine, the goalpost has moved. I can help more than one person. I can help more than one Chirag.
And you can have fun. It's like there's a great
Absolutely.
It's like there's a great joy in like these conversations and meeting each other, and like knowing that you and I probably, it would be very unlikely that we would have a long conversation about this stuff if not for uh podcasting. So I think that there's a lot of just great stuff to come from it. In terms of relapsing, though, the only real thing is being prepared. I think, and I think it's very important that everybody stay anybody who suffers with alcoholism or drug addiction should stay as prepared as possible, and then anybody who's prone to depression, the same thing.
You're right. So basically, if you're struggling with a disease like, so I have a thyroid issue and I take medication for it, and I don't know how long I need to keep having that medicine. So in an in a parallel world, instead of having that pill, you are doing those practices that are taught to you in the 12-step process, being grateful, making sure that you have people around, making sure, like in your case, serving and meeting other people to just get that reminder that life is good.
Yeah, and also just being connected to, so that the story in your head isn't the only story you're focused on.
Mm-hmm.
Because that story in your head is like 9 out of 10 times not going to benefit you.
No, it's a bad day. It's not a bad life.
Right.
What was the reaction when you guys hit 10 million downloads? That's absolutely fascinating, man. Dopey, the mission from how it started to 10 million downloads and still growing.
No, we're almost at 17 million now.
My, wow.
But I mean, me and Chris, we didn't even get to 1 million. You know,
Mm-hmm.
me and Chris didn't get to 1 million together. It wasn't until after he died that we had kind of exponential growth. And I think the reason that we had the exponential growth was because he died, and because people wanted to hear his story. And then this very big podcast called This American Life did a story about us. And that really, and then people like Jamie Lee Curtis and Mark
Yeah.
Maron and Killer Mike and all these people started coming on. I love the growth, and I love watching the numbers, and I feel, it makes me feel proud. It makes me feel happy. But as an addict, I know that I'll never get there. You know what I mean? Like, I get 17 million. It's like, why don't I have 70? Like, and I get 70. Why don't I have 1 billion? Yeah, I'm crazy. I've got serious mental problems. So like trying to like get satisfied with a number is not possible. But I love hearing from our community. Like
Mm-hmm.
our community is so powerful and like connected. The Dopey Nation community does 25 Zooms a week having nothing to do with me. You know, there's like this dopey world outside of me or the podcast, which is very real. And they're all connected through kind of the tenets of the show, which are just like make fun of whatever you can make fun of. And I mean, the two mottos we always said was let your freak flag fly and love is the answer, you know. And I think the Dopey Nation is very tuned into that stuff, and I'm so grateful that they're around. There's like 50 people with dopey tattoos on them, and I'm not one of them. So it's like I feel, and neither was Chris, and I feel really proud of that. And I love hearing from our community, and our show always has stories from the audience. We do a couple, probably 3 or 4 stories from the audience every episode, and we have the audience on the show very often. We're having a convention in New York in October. You should totally come if you'd like.
I heard about it. I want you to also tell us and touch upon what's the DopeyCon.
Yeah, DopeyCon was a dream me and Chris had, and we didn't get to do it until after he died, and we've been doing them since then. And this year is our 5th one, and it's on October 5th. And I think Jason Biggs from American Pie is going to come, and Hank Azaria is going to come, and Carl Radke from Bravo's Summer House is going to come, and maybe Dr. Drew will come back, and all of these very, very well-known women in recovery influencers are coming. And then the Dopey Nation is coming, and people are flying in from all over the world and all over the country. And and it's a lot of fun, and it's so cool to see everybody in person and meet them and talk to them. It's like a family reunion, and the Dopey Nation is very family style, and I love that. That's the best. The best part is like that we created this thing that we love doing, and that somebody else identified with, and they enjoyed it. Like that's far enough for me.
And just to put perspective to this journey, uh, at 41, writing that letter to your wife that please just let me smoke weed, and so that you could meet your daughter, and then realizing that what the fuck am I doing? From there till now, did you ever imagine that life had this in store for you too?
No, no, I didn't, and it revealed itself as it happened, and it still blows me away. Like even just my relationship with my children, or my wife, or 12 Step World, or Dopey Nation, or my dad. Like all of these relationships, they're just way better than I ever thought they could have been, and it's a good life. Like I'm very fortunate. I love my life. I love what I get to do.
I want to know, so what's the relationship with the father? How proud is he of you?
He's proud of me, but he's a pain. He's proud of me. He's proud of me, but like he always has something to say that, like there's always something that's not quite good enough, or there's something wrong with. It's very critical. He's a very critical person, my dad. But he's proud. He's proud, and more than anything, I think he's like so happy that he doesn't have to take care of me, and he's not worried about me dying. He's very proud of me, but my dad is like, he's very critical. My dad is on the show a lot, and I make fun of him a lot on the show, and I also always blame him for my heroin addiction on the show, which I love to do. Even though it's not necessarily the truth, I get a great satisfaction out of twisting the knife in him still.
Um, if you were to say one lesson that you've learned now through your journey, what's that one lesson?
I mean, the first thing that pops into my head is persistence is everything. Persistence is the answer to all of the questions. But love, persistence and love, like don't stop being loving. Don't stop doing good things. There's a great AA slogan that says, "Don't quit until the miracle happens," which applies to everything in life. Like if there's something you love, don't give up until it happens, because it will happen. If as long as you keep showing up, it's gonna happen. Like you extend the life of your dream by engaging in your dream, and it's the same with your recovery or with your relationships, with anything. It's you have to be persistent, because nobody's going to do it for you. And if that's the case, if you're going to keep going, and you keep trying on a daily basis, you get up and you try 5 things, 10 things, whatever, eventually you're going to get the combination, and the miracle will happen. And even if it doesn't, when you die, you're going to know that you've done everything you could do to have the life that you wanted, which is way better than quitting and being like, oh, if only I had tried X, Y, and Z. Like I love the process, and I've accomplished so much stuff that I've loved. And there's so many things that I haven't accomplished that I'm not going to quit trying. And one day I'll be like, that was a noble effort, and I feel good about it.
I think that's just magical, man.
Good. Well, I really appreciate you having me on, and
Thank you
honestly,
very much for this.
honestly, anything that you ever need from me, just email me.
I will definitely try my best to be there for the DopeyCon.
You
If
should
I'm
come
not,
to DopeyCon.
if I'm not, I am definitely going to be in New York soon. Once I'm there, I would definitely love to catch up with you over a coffee, and we'll be in touch. Big fan of you and your cause and your mission. Anyway, my platform can be of service and support to Dopey Nation. You have my email ID. I will be there.
I appreciate it so much, Chirag, and this was really fun and nice.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thank you very much.
Okay, right on, man.